Hello everyone, my name is Dominic and today we're going to be talking about setting up a Renderman pxrSurface to take the place or to texture glass or glass-like objects when we render in Renderman for Maya. So just to begin, this is something really cool in which we can use a pxrSurface that we can tailor its uniform attributes to fit, let's say, glass, plexiglass, or something else that is transparent to give us the look of glass objects in our scenes and in our renders. Now, this is no way in depth, and we can add a little bit more to this, but I'm going to stick with the basics here and show you guys what we're going to do. Let's first begin with this 3D model that we've got right here. This is a vase I just really quickly modeled, but something that I think is important to note is this vase has to be hollow, in which this case it is, so we can look down inside of this, the lip of this vase. But it also needs to be volumetric, meaning that it still needs to have volume. It can't just be an outer shell of a vase. If I hit, wireframe mode, I should be able to see two rows, for example, this inner row of faces right here and this outer row of faces. And as we can see, this glass has thickness, and that's super, super important. So if you are making something like a window pane or perhaps a glass vial, a bottle, or a vase, make sure that it is hollow, but it still has thickness, right? Just like this. So it is still volumetric in its own right. So once we've done all that, we've deleted our history, frozen our transformations, we can go ahead and launch the hypershade. And right now, let's go ahead and start by making a pxrSurface. I'm going to hit tab and create one, and I'm going to label this glass S for surface, so that way I can recognize it whenever I start assigning materials. Now we can look in our preview shader ball up here what the pxrSurface defaults to, in which case it's kind of this gray matte clay material. And we're just going to scroll through a couple of these attributes that we see in our attribute editor on the right to tailor this to look like glass. So the very first one that we get here is diffuse. Now you're probably most used to plugging in a texture map from something like Substance Painter into this diffuse color. But for us, glass or other transparent objects like glass do not have diffuse color. Like, they do not reflect off of their surface because they're not necessarily opaque in the same way. So we are actually going to change this value right here, which says gain, from 1, where it defaults to 0. And now this object reflects no light off of its surface. And it looks okay right now, like it's very pitch black, but we're going to keep messing with some attributes to get it to look like glass, but this is a great start. So with that, I'm just going to collapse this diffuse, toolbar drop down right here, and I'm going to move on to primary specular. Now, primary specular, I'm not going to mess with anything too much, but I am going to change the edge color right here, the second one down, from black to white. And as you can see, it now illuminates the curvature of our shader ball up here to look a little bit more realistic, and we always like that. And once that's said and done, I'm just going to collapse my primary specular dropdown, and I'm going to skip some of these really cool and really powerful attributes until I get to one that is glass, and let's go ahead and expand it so that way we can see what we're dealing with. This is where we're going to start making our object transparent and start getting light that is ray traced out by Renderman's rendering to refract and to reflect through our object like a transparent material. And so the way we do that is mainly through these top 3 attributes up here. The very first one is refraction gain, and it is currently default set to 0, but I'm going to give this a very high value. Now, on a scale or a spectrum of 0 to 1, 0 to 100%, my high value is going to be something like 0.93. And as you can see, it's starting to already work on the shader ball, and it's looking a little bit better. Now, the last attribute that I'm also going to change here is going to be reflection gain. Reflection gain allows light to pass through and reflect off of these other surfaces and kind of bend and distort like refraction gain. So I'm also going to set this to the same value as my refraction gain. 0.93 I think looks really nice. So we're going to leave everything else alone, but as you can see in our shader ball example right here, it's already starting to look very glass-like. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this screen, and let's go ahead and right-click and hold assign a new or existing material, and I'm going to let go on glass underscore S, which is the name of the pxrSurface that I had just made. And let's go ahead and render this out in the VDEV rig. Now, I had modeled this and I'm setting this up in the VDEV rig. I don't recommend that necessarily, but for the sake of this tutorial video, it's quicker to do it this way. So I'm going to launch a preview render up here, so that way we could see it. And if we look closely, this is now a very nice looking glass shader that we have applied to it, which is very cool. Now, before I end this, I'm going to show you one last thing that we can do with this particular glass pxrSurface, and that is modify the refraction color, which is this third attribute down right here. So if we click on this, this will allow you to change the tint of whatever glass color that we're dealing with, which is very cool. So if you're dealing with something that's like a car window that's tinted a little bit darker, or perhaps stained glass, this is where we can make those changes. So we can choose, if we click on this white box, that it normally defaults to that value of white. If we choose a different hue up here, we can tint our glass towards that specific color. Now, something important to note, depending on the color that you choose, the level of saturation right here in our S saturation scale that we need is going to be very, very, very low. So I'm going to grab this green color and I'm just going to push this up a very tiny bit. Right now it's at 0.1. And I'm going to leave the value completely alone at 0.811. And you'll notice back in our render, we can see it's tinted it quite green and it's looking really, really cool, kind of like a beer bottle. Industrial glass typically has a very, very subtle blue tint to it too, just barely. So I'm going to add just 0.028, not too much at all. And it's going to give us a little bit more of that industrial glass look, which is pretty interesting. Now, if you want this glass to feel a little bit more crystalline, right, like a Swarovski crystal, or to have a little bit of a clearer surface and reduce some of the highlight sizes that we've got right here, one thing that we can do is we can modify this roughness, which right now it's a default setting at 0.1. I'm not going to drop this to 0. If it were to drop to 0, it would look more similar to liquid water than it would to like a physical glass, but I can always enter in a lower value like 0.5. And we can see the highlights crispen up really nicely right here. If we wanted to go for something that was kind of a frosted glass texture, then I may want to boost this number up to, let's say, 0.3. And now our material looks a little bit more like frosted glass rather than a crystalline or crystal clear glass. So there are some other attributes that we can play around with here, but I'm not going to get too far into it, and I'll save that for a longer video with a more advanced topic. But hopefully this helps if you have objects that you want to set up to look like glass, then this is a very easy way to set up a pxrSurface and to get our renders to start looking a little bit more glass-like. So of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but hopefully you found this video helpful. Good luck with your projects, and bye-bye.